series, it's just a sum, and then in parallel, it would be 1 over.
For resistance, yes.
Okay.
Yes. It is the flip of what we deal with capacitance equivalence. All right, so question about resistors in series.
Is that the EQ after the R? REQ?
Yeah, subscript EQ for equivalent. It's just the sum of all the individual resistors. So quick and dirty, I got a 3 ohm resistor here, and I've got a 4 ohm resistor there. I can replace this with a single resistor of,
7.
give me the whole thing.
7 ohms.
All right, 7 ohms. Now you will find that my omegas, my capital omegas, tend to get worse the longer I go. You have this example right here. I did take time and care to try to draw that one more neatly. Just please be aware as you read my handwriting, if it looks like it's supposed to be an omega, it probably is. Capital omega.
That was an R.
I'm not sure that's much better, but I'm leaving it there. All right, so parallel. Parallel resistors, similar to parallel capacitors. There's a junction on both sides. The only thing between are the resistors that are in parallel. So I have a junction here, a junction there. Either path I'm going across a resistor, so this is R1 and this is R2. And I have some voltage across my battery. Employing Kirchhoff's voltage loop rule, or loop rule. If I go across the battery, I gain potential, and then go across resistor 2, I'm going to lose all that potential because I'm going to end up back at 0 again. I know that the current flowing out of the battery, using Ohm's law, is the voltage across the battery divided by the equivalent resistance. So I have current flowing in, flows into this junction right here, and then the current is going to split. Most of the current is going to go the path of least resistance. Not all of it. More of it will go that way. So my current flowing in, I'm just going to label as I, and then I have current flowing across R2, which is I2, and current flowing across R1, which is cleverly I1. Kirchhoff's current rule, or junction rule, is that whatever flows in flows out. And so my current flowing in is I, my current flowing out is I1 plus I2. So my voltage across the power supply divided by my equivalent resistance is going to be equal to the voltage flowing across R1 divided by R1 plus the voltage flowing across the second resistor over R2. The potential difference is the same for all of them. And so if we divide out the potential difference, we get 1 over R equivalent is 1 over R1 plus 1 over R2. So if this is a 3 ohm resistor and a 4 ohm resistor, my equivalent resistance, so I can replace this with 1 over equivalent resistance, is 1 over 3 plus 1 over 4, which is 7/12. So my equivalent resistance is 12/7 ohms, or the decimal 1.71. Or 2 8.
you ever hit a number dead on?
Actually, earlier today, I went out, this is as close as this I've gotten. I went out 6 decimal places. If you remove the third one I put in there, I was spot on. I was surprised. Because at some point I'm just making numbers up.
You got a calculator in your brain?
I had to do math without a calculator for so long, develop shortcuts. Although I feel like it's slipping, you know, there is that certain point, you know, that at what point do I realize that I'm, you know, that my mental facilities are breaking down? Will I ever know if I have dementia? I don't know if people know that. I know that some of them describe it as there's a feeling of loss and then they come back. But I figured that I'm gonna start noticing it when my estimating just gets worse and worse and worse.
It's kind of scary to think about.
Pardon?
Kind of scary to think about.
Yeah, you know, I'm over a half century old, you know, it's, I'm somewhere around the 2/3 mark in my life. It's gonna happen to you one day. Sure it
Happy
does.
thoughts.
But if I think about it, think about how much I learned in the first third of my life. If I learned just as much in the last third of my life, that'd be cool. Hopefully I'm not learning the same stuff I learned in the first third.
That's true.
Hopefully you don't end up learning the same stuff every day.
Although it might come to that. My wife and I already have plans that when it's near the end, we're gonna go out in the blaze of glory. I always think Butch Cassidy, the Sundance Kid kind of thing, guns blazing. We'll see what happens. Blaze of glory though. He was always such a quiet man, and then suddenly he... All right, so think about what's happening here. I've got a battery, let's take my 12-volt battery. I have a 3 ohm resistor. And so my current flowing through the wire is 4 amperes. Just V, there's a 12-volt drop across here, and 12 divided by 3 is 4. Now I add a resistor. And now the current flowing out of this is, let's see, now I'm gonna have 7 amperes flowing out. By adding a resistor, I have more current flowing out of the battery. How does that make any sense? By adding a resistor, I get more current flowing. Austin?
Some of the current is gonna go to the path of like more resistance, like since it goes 2 different paths.
It will go 2 different paths, but I'm trying to, how do you resolve the idea that adding a resistor allows more current flowing out of the battery?
Because you added it in parallel,
Keep going.
and then that makes it like the equivalent the equivalent resistance will be less than 3.
Right, okay, that's the math side of it. I was trying to think of physically, why does it make more sense by adding a resistor?
Because your voltage doesn't change. Well, before
Here. Still has to equal 0,
Does what?
because it still has to equal 0.
All right, you're still looking at the math approach here. Apparently your mind reading skills are awful today. All right. Think about it this way. There's a fire. And we have to get out the door quickly. So we all go cramming towards the door. Now you can think of resistance as how narrow the door is. The narrower the door, the harder it is for people to get through. The more narrower the door, the slower the current. Think about your charges, fewer charges get through the doorway and per unit time. So you probably get at most 2 people through at a time. And now we open up another door. Now we got stuff blocking this door. Say right there. Not everyone's going to get through that one. That's still the widest door over there between the 2. More people are going to go through that door than this one. But if one person goes through this door, we have more current flowing out of the room. We added a resistor, yes, but we actually dropped the resistance, because before I put that in there, what was the resistance going this path?
Zero.
No.
4?
Going from here around to here? What's the resistance across this gap?
Oh. Yeah.
Is that the permittivity?
No, not looking for permittivity. If I take a battery and I stick a battery right here, I've got two leads, I've got a positive and negative lead. How much current flows from one lead to the other with the battery just sitting there?
No.
So what is the resistance?
Infinity.
So when we add the resistor, what we're actually doing is we are dropping the resistance from infinite to something. We have opened up a second path. Think of the doorways. But from a physical point of view, we are dropping the resistance by opening up the second path. That's why it drops the overall resistance.
So you don't think of it as adding resistance when you add a second resistor?
But lowering the resistance of that path.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
But
Because
this
the
is only-
equivalent resistance is lower.
Say it again?
The equivalent resistance would be lower overall then.
Yes, absolutely. Because even though you still have as much current flowing across this one as you did before, some of them are gonna go, wait a second, here's a less traveled path.
Okay.
And
then-
considering that they're up on their frost bones, they think they're really less traveled.
And then for the series, using your analogy here to be like having a door there and then a door right in front of it.
Yeah.
Okay.
And in terms of, we talked about drift velocity, or drift speed. Think of the tables as atoms, you run into it, you're gonna bounce off of it, and then you'll slowly work your way through. And from an area point of view, if I have a wider area, then I have less resistance, because it's rho L over A. That would be like, you have a very narrow path that you can go through, or suddenly you open up the entire room, and so some people can come around. This way, you open up more paths. All right, Precious, you had a question?
Yeah, that was my question, the
Okay.
series.
All right. Any other questions at the moment?
So from a material perspective, you could engineer a material either extremely porous, like carbon nanotubes, where their electrons are flowing across the surface, or could you engineer a material in which the center was super dense, but then the outside was less dense, and therefore it had a higher permittivity guiding the electrons to the surface?
The trouble I have with it is that when you talk about porous surfaces, I'm thinking of, physical gaps that charges are not gonna flow through it, as opposed to, hey, here's an open pathway for them to travel
Oh,
through.
I'm thinking about-
Basically high density then low density.
I'm thinking about like a polymer in which you would have like a high density core.
Okay.
And then low density, atoms on the external.
All right, so basically, you have a resistivity that varies with location.
Right.
Okay.
Or not necessarily, well, the
That would be the equivalent of parallel resistors, I would say.
right, but what I'm thinking is, could you engineer a material that, takes advantage of a low density and or a high permittivity or a low resistivity on the outside of the cylindrical shape of the wire?
I would think you could. Now, ultimately, all of this is around controlling current flow, so I don't know why you would do that, but I would think that you could do that. Because on a very simple level, this is what I think it was the first semester I was here, the resistivity lab was, I hadn't found some of the equipment yet, and so we just basically used graphite from a pencil. And you drew a line, you found the resistance in that line, you draw it different lengths, and you get a relationship between length and resistance. And then you can draw a second path in parallel. And then one of them, to increase the area of it, drew a line with a pencil and then drew another line right on top of that. And what's shocking is how good the results were doing that. amazed just with a pencil. Part of me wants to do it again, even though it's an inferior experiment to what we do now.
But there's something interesting there when it comes to thinking about how we can engineer materials soon.
Yeah, especially with the nanotechnology.
Right. Like, that's what my thought is, like, with carbon nanotubes, the conductance is just ridiculous because they're hollow.
Okay.
But if you could take something like copper as a core, and then come up with a material that goes around the copper atoms in some type of carbon copper polymer. I don't know what your binders would be, but it would be interesting to see if the high density core with like the low density outer like molecular structure would create higher conductance.
Okay. So if they're doing that at the nano level, I know Wake Forest does nano stuff. They do nano stuff here, but I think we're in conjunction with Wake at the moment.
Okay.
And A&T is doing nano stuff also?
Probably.
Yeah, with Greensboro.
What?
With UNCG.
UNCG?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Oh, and A&T?
Mhm.
Okay. By the way, I will occasionally call it AT&T just because I knew of the telecommunication firm before I knew of the university. So apologies. Correct me when I do that. Handing stuff back. I started to pull them together and then they're pseudo-organized at this point. Mario. And I should turn the camera off. It's not already off.